If you haven't had a chance to check it out, I would encourage you to go to the Chapter 12 video clips link in the Chapter 12 module. There are a variety of different video clips in here on the subject of problem solving. And so the first 4 video clips are all about my #1 all-time ever favorite movie, Armageddon. And so the first video clip shows you the symptoms of the problem, and then the second video clip talks about the actual root cause. And then the next 2 video clips or the third one is how they go about attempting to solve it, and then the fourth one is their final solution, what they're going to attempt to do. Now this is interesting that on a chapter on problem solving, we have a problem with one of these videos. The second one is actually in French. And so as you watch it, unless you speak French, you're not going to have any idea what it is that they're talking about. So before I tell you what they're talking about, go out and watch the first 2 clips, and then I'll pause for just a moment to give you a chance, and then I'll tell you what they're actually saying in the second clip. All right, so here you go. Spoiler warning. What they're saying is that there is an asteroid headed towards Earth, and it will directly impact Earth. The other asteroids that had hit New York and the rest of the planet were the size of baseballs and Volkswagens, and the asteroid that is currently headed towards Earth is the size of Texas. And it doesn't matter where it hits the planet Earth, if it hits in the ocean or if it hits on land, it is going to be an extinction level event. All life on Earth will be destroyed, including bacteria. And then a guy runs into the room and says, I know when it's going to hit. We have 18 days. So now that we've solved the problem that you may not speak French, you can continue on and watch the other 2 video clips about what they propose and then finally what they decide to do about it. The next 2 video clips are about an actual real-life event, and I love these because it's based upon the actual events of Apollo 13. And that was a mission to the moon, and they took a lunar module and they attached it to the front of a command module, and they blasted them both out into space. And the whole idea was that the command module, or this spaceship, was supposed to orbit the moon, enter the orbit of the moon. And then 2 of the 3 men were going to get into the lunar module, and they were going to drop down to the moon and do their little moon magic. And then they were going to blast off from the moon, and they were going to rendezvous back with the command module that had the 3rd man inside of it. And then all 3 of the men would come back in the command module. They were on their way to the moon when there was an explosion in the main module that actually disabled the main module. And so they all 3 of the men move into the lunar module. And the idea was no longer to get them to in orbit around the moon. The whole goal was now to bring these 3 astronauts home. And this is based on some real live actual events. And so these 2 clips talk about one of the problems that they were presented with. And there were many, many, many problems that they encountered in their efforts to bring home our 3 astronauts. And so these 2 clips just point out one of the myriad of problems that they encounter. And it is a fascinating story. I don't know how accurate it is historically, but I do know that at least one of the clips in there, when you see the news anchors that are talking about the problems that they're having, at least one of those clips was real live actual news footage that they were able to include in the movie. The last clip that's in here is called The Scientific Method, as acted out by Monty Python. And so you can watch this clip as we are going through the first of the 3 problem-solving approaches, and they all boil down to something called the scientific method. And this is a reasonably hilarious visual of how that scientific method might be played out. Chapter 12 begins our portion of the textbook on software development and programming. And many people have the mistaken impression that you can just sit down at a computer and start typing up source code without any sort of plan in mind. And we're going to find out that computer programming requires some critical thinking and some problem-solving skills. And most people are not born, nobody is born with problem-solving skills. It's something that we learn and we taught and we practice and we master. So to start off in this section of software design or software development, We are going to talk about several different problem-solving approaches. Your book talks about 3 specifically. And the first one is the Strawman Argument. And the Strawman Argument is a problem-solving approach who attempts to help us find the root cause of a problem. The Strawman Argument involves getting people around bouncing ideas off of each other about what is causing a particular problem. And the whole idea is that as each person throws out an idea, everyone else is going to come up with the reasons why that can't possibly be what is causing the problem. And then somebody else throws out an idea and another person will knock it down, and somebody else throws out another idea and someone knocks it down. Because ultimately, if somebody throws out an idea that nobody can knock down, that very well might be the root cause of the problem. This makes me think of the TV show called House. He was a nationally recognized medical diagnostician, and he used a team of people around him to try to troubleshoot why people were having medical problems. And they would throw out ideas, and the others would tell why it couldn't possibly be true. And then ultimately, when nobody could come up with a reason why that might not be the problem, then they would move ahead to try to treat the problem. That's the idea of the Strawman Argument. Throwing out ideas or straw men with the idea that it's going to be knocked down until such time as we find one that is not. The next of the problem-solving approaches listed in your book is called the rule of thumb. The rule of thumb is the idea that you probably have experience with this or have encountered this before. And so the first thing that comes to your mind about what might be causing this might be the reason why it's occurring. Then the second most common reason it might be occurring, the third most common reason why it's occurring. From your experience, what would you imagine is the reason why this is occurring? It's called the rule of thumb. An example of this, forgive me for the stereotype, is that when you walk into your house and your beloved or your spouse or your parent is standing down at the end of the hall with their arms crossed and their foot tapping and they're burning fire from their eyes, what is the first thing that comes to your mind? Yeah, that's the rule of thumb. You start ticking off things in your mind, running through excuses in your mind for why they might be mad at you. This is called the rule of thumb, and the same thing can apply in common sense ways to a problem that you're encountering. Let's say 80% of the time I encounter it, it's happening because of this. 75% of the time I encounter it, it's happening because of this. 30% of the time it's happening because of this. And so we can work out intellectually in our mind why something might be occurring, and then we make an effort to see if that is indeed the root cause of the problem. Now, both of these particular problem-solving approaches attempt to find the root cause, or what is causing the problem. The next one is called following a procedure, and this is a problem-solving approach. When you know what the root cause is, how do I go about solving it? What are the steps involved in solving the problem? And then ultimately you create a procedure, or you follow a well-established procedure in order to solve it. It makes me think of a British TV show called The IT Crowd. And they were IT support for a large company holed up in a basement somewhere. And every time the phone would ring, they would pick it up and say, have you rebooted your machine? And then they would hang up. And the next time the phone rang, they would do it again. Finally, they actually just created a recording. And whenever the phone rang, it would automatically pick up with this recording saying, reboot your machine and call me back if you're still having problems. Because the procedure that they encouraged was rebooting the machine. And most of the time, that would solve your problem. So these 3 problem-solving approaches all boil down to something called the scientific method. And the scientific method basically says you need to observe what's happening, and then you need to propose a theory for why it's happening, and then you need to test your theory, and then finally you're going to repeat steps 1 through 3 until you have found a theory that very well might be a solution to the problem. I would say that all problem-solving approaches boil down to something to this, the scientific method.